Hi again, everybody. Matt Smith here as usual. And this is my next video that I'm going to be doing for you. And this one is about what I was doing in Maine the second year and beyond when we had our trailer in Beach Acres. The year was 1987. And after that, after I got diagnosed with hyperlexia and other learning disability orders, including autism, I ended up going to this fabulous place called May School, which actually took place right behind the Burlington High School that was located on just off of 123 Cambridge Street in Burlington. But there were a couple other side streets around where you can access to the high school the back ways. But after that successful few months, and I was learning, and my parents were feeling very happy about myself, then things got more relaxing. And when we would go up to our trailer park in Maine for the weekends, I can simply remember where I could be relaxing in a couch, since we now had our porch with a television and our furniture. I could just be sitting on the couch, listen to a story by my mother, or I could be riding along side corners, sidewalks with a tricycle. And as I said before, this was where I learned how to ride a bicycle and swim. But in the year 1987, we not only had our weekends in Wells, Maine, but for a short period of time, we started to explore other areas in the Pine Street state. And most notably, we ended up going to this location right by the water called Bar Harbor. Now, Bar Harbor, you can locate that on the map, but two ways to get there if you're from Portland, Maine. You can either go on Route 1, which would be kind of a long drive depending on the speed limit, or you could go on Route 95, and you would have to go off the exit in Bangor, Maine to go further down south. So we ended up going down there for the first time that year. I believe we stayed right by the bay at this little place at that time called the Golden Anchor Inn and Pier. And I do remember after our visit, we brought back a couple of souvenir cups that we would add to our shelf inside the cupboard of our trailer. So the first time we went there in 87, it was just a nice piece of tranquility, and we were right by the ocean, and we took a couple of hikes around Acadia Island. And when we weren't outside or anything, our hotel room would provide a nice backdrop for right by the water and the boating center. So we went in 1987 the first time, but 1 year later, in 1988, it was much the same thing. And we kind of preferred being in our trailer for most of the part. But when we went to Bar Harbor the second time, my father just went absolutely nuts and decided to go on an overnight ferry from the pier there all the way to Yarmouth, Nova Scotia, Canada. So this would be the first time I would ever go outside New England into a foreign country. So that's, of course, where we had to have our passports and stuff like that. So the first time we went to Bar Harbor, it was just by impulse. We visited a couple of places and stayed at a couple of, I think, roadside hotels overnight. But there was one occasion where we did go on a whale watching cruise, so I could get a little experience with the mammals and whales and see how they come up to the surface for air. So that summer 1988, it was just like impulse to visit another foreign country unexpectedly. And as I can recall, it was the first time that I was sleeping in a cabin that resembled a bunk bed. And sleeping in that bunk bed in such a tight space was a little bit different than the normal bed that I would sleep both in my own home in Burlington and in Wells, Maine. So that was the first time we visited Nova Scotia, and of course, we would be going back there 3 or 4 more times as a family that year. But also, I remember in 1988 in Wells, Maine, my father had the video camera just to tape our day in the life of we would spend for the weekend. I had my Fisher Price 6-piece bowling set where I was rolling down pins in the porch. And then by the time I turned 4, earlier in that November, that was where I had my first bicycle. And of course, like everybody else, to start to learn to ride a bicycle, I had the training wheels. And then I would go around along with my father around the blocks just for a little exercise. And another notable thing that I do remember about going to Wells, Maine on the weekends was this place in Wells Beach on the end of Mile Road called the Boardwalk Arcade, which I used to call Crash because it was based on the video game by Atari called Pole Position. And basically, if you're off the road and you bump into something, then it explodes. And that was where my father and I had the fun time of saying crash like that. Plus, I also remember how to play skee ball in that arcade, which I practiced a little bit, and I actually ended up start scoring on that game. But of course, also when I was swimming in the pool, I started off by wearing a special type swimsuit, which was I think it was in the color red, and it had a floaty on my side so that it would prevent me from sinking to the bottom. So for a long time, I forgot about that type of swimsuit until I found out that myself in Maine, when my father videotaped me, that's what it looked like. So I think I still have the DVD of my mother, my father, and I that summer in 1988. And the best part about traveling now was when my father traded in a Plymouth Valiant with a Plymouth Voyager. That ended up being our family car. So with up to 5 of us in our family, it could fit everybody. And not only did my father get a Plymouth Voyager for all of us, but my grandmother went from a Plymouth Omni to a Sundance. And you could tell by 1988 the variety of cars that then the Plymouth made was starting to come on the market and proved very good quality. So, of course, I do remember 1987, 1988, in between those summers, where it was right in between. I went from May school to lab school in Burlington, where I was having the days at the Burlington High School and back. And because of their success and what I started to learn in that time, I started to become a more happy, positive young kid. And my parents were yelling at me less. And whenever it was time to go on the weekends after that to Wells, Maine, it was well deserved. But I haven't told you in either of my videos yet how I went from Burlington, Massachusetts to Wells, Maine. You start on Route 3A, which eventually becomes Route 3 if you go past southbound on Route 128 or 95. We got on the highway on Route 128-95, continued up northbound, took a separate turn when 128 became an exit around Peabody. And we just continued on 95 all the way until we got up to York, Maine. And in between, we would go on past these two big green bridges. One was past the Merrimack River in around Amesbury, Massachusetts, and another one was from the Pascoa River going from Portsmouth, New Hampshire to Kittery, Maine. I call them bridge number 1 and bridge number 2. And basically, my parents got used to that. And then when we got off of the exit 7 in York, Maine, then we took Route 1 from New York to the Algonquin until we got to Eldridge Road, and that's where Beach Acres was. So overall, the trip would be like 83 miles, and it would take approximately, I would say, an hour and a half to get to that location every time. Most notably, if we had a 2-day break on the weekend, we would go up on Friday afternoon and then come home to Burlington, Mass on Sunday afternoon before the week would begin. Well, I think covering the couple years that we had certainly brings more distant memory for me. And I didn't tell you that our cable system, of course, in Maine was the Cablevision, which was a little different than what we got in Burlington, Massachusetts. But believe it or not, that cable system in Maine was actually where we had Nesson. And that's why I was watching this show called Big Shot Bowling on Nesson when I couldn't do it back home in Burlington. So I was not as known for that show to watch as the others. But now that we have YouTube and all the information about that show, I understand it a little bit better. Okay, so that's all I have to explain about that, and thank you for your time and cooperation.